government on multiple issues. Her gender identity policy could be the newest front in that fight.
What she has proposed to ban young LGBTQ2 kids from being who they are puts lives at risk. And the decision to come out to one's family does not belong to a teacher, a school. It definitely does not belong to a premier. That is a person's decision alone. I hope we don't get to a court challenge, but we're going to look at every single option. And it's really important that Albertans and Canadians lean in and say, this is not the Canada of today.
Danielle Smith is, of course, the Premier of Alberta, and she joins me now here in Ottawa. Premier, welcome to the show. It's good to have you back in the studio this time. I want to start with the gender policy you rolled out late last week. The pediatrics section of the Alberta Medical Association released a statement on this policy, warning that transgender youth already have higher rates of mental health issues and thoughts of suicide because of stigma. And they warn this policy will increase that stigma and make these mental health problems worse. I wonder, why are you pushing medical policies that medical experts warn will harm these kids?
Well, I guess I have to think of the patients and the children. That's who I have in mind. And one of the things that I was struck by was a woman named Lois Cardinal, who sued our government, actually. She wanted medical assistance in dying because she felt like she was forced into transitioning faster than she wanted to. She started her process at 19, and by 21, she had already had top and bottom surgery and had nothing but medical problems afterwards. And so I felt, you know, if a 19-year-old into this, when is the right age for a young person to make these decisions? So we want to just make sure that there's clear guideposts so that kids are being supported along the way, so that families are involved in the process, and that's the reason why we put the package together.
I mean, this is a terrible story about Lois Cardinal, but is that the basis of the policy? Did you consult with experts on this? Because the medical experts in your province are saying they were not consulted on this policy.
I can tell you that there's a division in the medical community, and we saw that in the UK when they shut down their Tavistock gender identity clinic. And we don't want to do that, obviously. We don't want to leave anybody without having continuity of care. But it was similar kinds of concerns about when is the appropriate time for a child to make the decision on puberty blockers. When's the appropriate time for a child to make a decision on cross-sex hormones and surgery? And so we're watching what's happening in the UK and Denmark and the Netherlands, Sweden, Finland, Norway. They're all making these kinds of really difficult decisions and having these really important public discussions, and we think it's time that we did too.
But I guess, which experts did you consult? Did you just read what other countries are doing? Like, who wrote this policy and in consultation with whom?
There's been a lot of consultation, and we've been watching the trends around the world. We've been watching what's happening in the rest of the country. We've been listening to parents. Parents are the ones who are most concerned. They want to know what's going on with their kids. And I think, unfortunately, what we're seeing is that increasingly there are policies being proposed that would divide families, and we want to make sure that families stay together, because quite frankly, these kids are at risk, and they need to have a loving, supportive family around them. They need to have loving, supportive adults around them, and you don't get to that if you cut the family out of these important discussions.
I understand that, but you don't want to cut experts out of important policy decisions either, right? So I'm just wondering, which experts did you consult with? Who sat down with you as you were drafting these regulations? I mean, clearly a lot of work went into the communications of it with the video, but it's unclear to me who you consulted with.
As I said, we're watching what is happening around the world, and there is a robust discussion about at what point do these decisions get made. And so we've started the conversation. We're going to continue it. The policy is going to be drafted and legislation in the fall, so there's lots of opportunity to continue having input. But we thought it was important, with some of the early concerns that we've been hearing from parents, that we make it pretty clear that there's going to be some guidelines around.
So is it driven mostly by that, concerns by parents, rather than medical advice and academic advice?
Well, as I said, the medical community is divided on this. There's different advice given by different medical associations, and there's different approaches. And we have to make sure that we are using the best evidence. Unfortunately, there isn't long-term evidence about what happens to these kids after transition. There isn't long-term evidence about the impact of having cross-sex hormones as well as on the puberty blockers. And so we want to take a cautious approach. We don't want young people to make decisions that are going to be irreversible. We think those are adult decisions.
The puberty blockers and the hormones, and stop taking the medicine and things go back to the normal path. Surgery, of course, would be irreversible. Bottom surgery is not legal for anyone under the age of 18. Only top surgery is. According to the data we've seen nationally, only 985 people had top gender reassignment surgery in 2023. Out of a population of 40 million people, it was only 22 people under the age of 18 in Alberta in 2023. How many kids are you trying to manage with this process? It seems like it's a small enough number, it could be dealt with case by case with a medical practitioner rather than requiring big government intervention.
We believe that kids should not be going down a path where they're going to make irreversible decisions about their reproductive health until they're of an age and a maturity level where they're able to deal with the consequences of that. Most practitioners will say that age is about 16. That's why we're going to make sure that kids have access to cross-sex hormones as early as 16 with the input of their parents, a psychologist and a doctor, and then surgery not until age 18. But these are really difficult conversations to have, and we just don't want any young children to feel like they've made a decision that is going to impact their ability to have children in the future prematurely. I think they need to have a maturity level to be able to make those decisions.
You've talked about parental rights in this, and on the medical side of it, parental decision-making is largely removed and government decision-making is substituted for that, right? So how does that square with your advocacy of parental rights? And again, how many children in Alberta are asking for this surgery? Like, how big of a population are you trying to manage with this policy?
Look, sometimes government has to step in. When you look at the opioid crisis that we have right now, a lot of that was overprescription by medical doctors of dangerous opioids, thinking that they were safe. They turned out not to be safe. And so sometimes we have to take that extra level of diligence to make sure that we're getting evidence-based research about the long-term impact. And unfortunately, we just don't have that evidence-based research yet. And so we want to take a cautious approach to support the kids who are currently going through transition, make sure they feel supported, their families are involved, and that they have a pathway to be able to become who they want to be.
The federal government says you're demonizing trans kids. Your critics in Alberta say this could cost kids' lives. And we've seen some political analysis in Alberta that this is all because of Take Back Alberta, which has taken over a lot of your rural riding associations or gotten elected en masse in a lot of your rural riding associations. What do you say to these claims?
Well, I think it's disappointing that the media hasn't covered what is happening around the world and why it is the Tavistock clinic got closed. In fact, Thunder Bay, they've actually closed another clinic that is going to leave kids without care. We're not doing that. We're taking an approach that we want to have continuity of care. We understand that it's important, but these decisions are made very quickly as well, and you can't cut families out of them. Because when a child is confirmed and wants to make this pathway forward, it is very quick to move along the process, and they need to feel supported. So we want to make sure that no decisions are made before a child has the maturity level to deal with the consequences, and that's why we put the policy in place.
You're now the third premier, though, to come out with a big policy on this, and it affects such a small group of people. Why is such a small group of people across the country, and even smaller, in Alberta as a subset of this group of people, being given so much political focus in terms of their life decision making process instead of leaving it to them, their family, and their doctor?
Well, I can tell you there's a New York Times article that suggests as many as 10% of kids who transition regret it and want it reversed. There's 20% who don't continue on. So a 30% number of people who make a decision to go down this path of irreversible changes and having regret later, that's a very high number of failure. And so I'm looking at those individuals. I want them to make sure that when they make a decision, they understand the full consequences and they're prepared to deal with it. We don't want any regret, not on these important decisions. So it doesn't matter how small that number is. I would like the number of kids who are expressing regret because they transitioned too early, didn't know the consequences, and gave up the chance of having children. I want that number to be zero. And the way you do that is you make sure that you have more diligence in the process.
On the other side of the ledger, though, are people who have gone through this journey and said if these options weren't available to them at a young age, self-harm was prevalent, suicide was a possibility, the stigma and the depression and the mental health toll of not being able to get puberty blockers, hormone therapy would have been catastrophic for them. How do you balance it on the other side, Premier, if they can't get the care that they say they need?
And that's why we are making the care available at 16 years of age for those who have the maturity level to be able to make those decisions and deal with the consequences.
Post-puberty, though, right? And for kids with gender dysphoria, that's too late, a lot of them say.
Well, as I say, they've done a pretty thorough research at Tavistock and made the decision that there needs to be more evidence-based approaches when we're talking about these kinds of interventions. And so we're going to continue to make sure that the kids who are in the middle of transition are supported, their families are involved, and that there's a clear pathway for them to be able to get the care they need. Because that's the other thing that I learned from Lois's story is we don't do great aftercare. In Alberta, we have patients having to go to Quebec to get their surgery. And then when there's complications, there isn't good aftercare to be able to make sure that they're taken care of. Those who do transition need lifelong treatment of hormones. We have to make sure those doctors are available. So that's the other aspect of it, is we want to make sure that there is a supportive environment for both the psychological support as well as good basic medical support for those who do this transition and need to be supported into adulthood.
A final question on this policy. This seems headed for a court challenge, if you believe what Egal and Skipping Stone and other people who work in the trans and queer rights advocacy space have said. Will you use the notwithstanding clause to get this through and to protect it?
I can tell you there already is case law and jurisprudence around the issue of mature minors. Those are the kind of decisions that courts will make. They're a sort of rare number of kids who are deemed at younger ages to be able to make those kinds of life-changing decisions, but I don't want to prejudge what the courts will decide. And if there are certain cases that go forward, I guess we'll watch the jurisprudence and see what happens.
Scott Moe, though, has used it or threatened to use it in Saskatchewan. Is that something you're ruling out or not taking off the table?
Well, look, I'm hoping that because of the way we frame this, that we're protecting the kids' rights to be able to make long-term decisions and bear the consequences of it. And we're wanting to make sure that there's an assessment of maturity in making those decisions. So I'm hopeful that people see that this is going to be supportive. We want to give a pathway to those who want to transition to become who they want to be.